The heavy door of the SUV swung open, and the world instantly turned white. Jenna Ortega stepped out, and the air was torn apart by the rhythmic, strobe-like snap of 100 camera shutters. Light exploded against her vision, washing out the velvet ropes and the faces of the press. She took one step, then another, feeling the uneven texture of the carpet beneath her heels. Her pulse jumped against her throat. The sheer volume of the flashes was deafening, a mechanical roar that swallowed all other sound. She stumbled slightly as a particularly bright burst hit her eyes, forcing her to blink rapidly to clear the spots dancing in her sight. She paused, planting her feet firmly to steady herself, and inhaled deeply. The smell of ozone from the flashbulbs hung thick in the air. She lifted her chin, locking her jaw, and willed her eyes to focus through the blinding glare. The wall of lenses tracked her every move. She moved forward again, her stride deliberate, stepping into the center of the press line where the heat of the lights felt almost physical, waiting for the first question to break the wall of noise. She expected the roar, the standard, predictable wall of sound that greeted every arrival at this event. Instead, she stepped into a vacuum. The shutters continued to fire, but the voices behind them had changed. It was not the usual shouting of names. It was a low, rhythmic murmur that traveled down the line like a current. Jenna kept her pace steady, her internal clock counting the seconds between each deliberate step. She turned her head slightly, offering the practiced profile, but the response was delayed. She heard a sharp intake of breath from a photographer barely 3 feet away. Then, a mutter. Then, another. The sound was not cheering. It was a collective, disjointed assessment. She walked past the first cluster of media, and the whispers intensified behind her, a dry, rustling sound like leaves skittering across concrete. Her shoulders stiffened. She had been on 100 carpets, but this was different. The atmosphere had shifted from professional adoration to a cold, clinical scrutiny. She felt the weight of 100 gazes pressing against her back, not as fans, but as observers looking for something out of place. She maintained her forward momentum, ignoring the prickle of heat on her skin, while the whispers continued to follow her, growing louder with every passing meter. The sound of the crowd faded into a dull drone as a man in the front row stepped forward, blocking her path. He did not ask for a pose. He did not call her name. He simply tilted his head, his lens inches from her face, and squinted. The harsh white lights overhead caught the sweat on his forehead. He stayed there for 3, 4, 5 seconds, his eyes darting across her features with clinical precision. Jenna kept her smile fixed, though her jaw tightened. She tried to shift slightly to the left, but he mirrored her movement, refusing to let her pass. He lowered his camera for a split second, his brow furrowing as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. He leaned in further, his breath visible in the cold air of the press pen. He shook his head slowly, a gesture of genuine confusion. "Wait," he muttered, his voice cutting through the mechanical clicking. He looked back at his camera screen, then up at her again, his expression hardening into something sharper. He did not blink. He stared directly at her with a look of profound skepticism. The surrounding photographers stopped their rhythmic firing, sensing the shift in momentum. The silence returned, heavier and more focused than before. The reporter's doubt acted as a catalyst. Around him, other photographers lowered their cameras, their thumbs dancing rapidly across smartphone screens. The rhythmic clicking of shutters died down, replaced by a strange, collective silence, punctuated by the soft tapping of keys. Jenna stood frozen in the center of the path, her smile beginning to waver under the weight of the stillness. Then, a sharp notification ping cut through the air, followed by another and another. It was a rhythmic, digital chorus. She watched as a young woman nearby held up her screen, her eyes darting between the device and Jenna with a look of growing realization. The woman's fingers tapped furiously, hit send, and looked up again. Within seconds, the whispers returned, but they were different now. They were not just observations. They were accusations fueled by a live, unfolding feed. A headline flashed on a nearby screen. "Is that really Jenna? She looks completely different." The words seemed to hang in the air, visible to everyone in the pen. Jenna kept her gaze forward, but her peripheral vision caught the screens lighting up in unison, a sea of glowing rectangles reflecting off the pavement. The digital storm had arrived, and the crowd was no longer looking at her. They were looking at the version of her currently being dismantled online. Jenna stood rigid, her posture maintained with a practiced, hollow grace. She faced the next bank of cameras, but her attention drifted. Beside her, her assistant shifted weight from one foot to the other. A muffled, persistent buzz emerged from the assistant's pocket. It was not a single alert, but a continuous, rhythmic tremor that seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of the air. The assistant reached down, touched the pocket, and glanced at Jenna with a look of mounting alarm. The buzzing did not stop. It intensified, an invisible, frantic pulse that signaled a tide of incoming information. Jenna felt the tension coil in her own chest. She could hear the faint, high-pitched whine of the device struggling against the fabric. Her assistant's fingers hovered near the pocket, hesitant to pull the device out amidst the flashing lights. Every vibration was a hit, a notification, a new layer of the digital storm pressing against them. Jenna turned her head slightly, her gaze locking onto the assistant's pocket, then back to the camera lens. She forced a breath, kept her smile pinned to her face, and stepped forward. She knew that the pocket was holding a disaster, and the persistent, throbbing sound was the only clock that mattered now. The crowd moved from passive observation to surgical analysis. Photographers had stopped shooting for the news, and were now shooting for the forums. High-resolution images from the carpet were uploaded in real time, instantly colliding with archives from years past. On thousands of screens, the two images sat side by side, locked in a digital frame. Fans zoomed in, dragging sliders across the glass to align eyes, noses, and mouths. They were looking for inconsistencies, mapping the geometry of her face against the memories they held. A collective hum of speculation rose from the press line as the comparison tools did their work. One fan held a tablet high, showing a composite image to the person next to them, their finger tracing the line of her cheek. Every subtle angle of her head as she posed became a new data point for the masses. The scrutiny was no longer about the event or the project she was there to promote. It was about the pixels. They dissected the lighting, the shadows, and the stillness of her expression, building a case out of light and data. She was no longer a person on a carpet. She was a shifting puzzle being reassembled by a million pairs of eyes. The digital conversation narrowed, shedding all other features to focus on a single point of contention, her jawline. On platforms across the globe, users drew white lines over her profile, measuring the angle of the bone against the soft, rounded contours from her earlier work. They posted side-by-side overlays, claiming the sharpness was unnatural, a physical impossibility that defied the aging process. The debate was aggressive. One user zoomed in on the shadow cast beneath her chin, arguing that it revealed the work of a surgeon rather than the passage of time. A reporter near the front of the line leaned in, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. He asked a question about her latest role, but his eyes stayed fixed on her jaw, tracking the way the light caught the edge of her face. The scrutiny was suffocating. Every time she spoke, the movement of her skin was logged and analyzed in the comments. The internet had decided that this specific area of her face was the key to unlocking a secret she had not revealed. It was no longer a discussion about a public figure. It was an interrogation of her bone structure, played out in thousands of pixels. Jenna stood pinned beneath the strobe-like rhythm of the camera flashes. Her face remained a calculated study in professional composure, but her eyes were active, darting rapidly across the sea of lenses and microphones. She mapped the perimeter of the carpet, searching for a gap in the barricades or a momentary lapse in the line of reporters. Every direction was blocked by a wall of shouting voices and raised devices. There was no clear path. She shifted her weight, the movement subtle, and adjusted her posture to maintain the illusion of ease. Her smile remained fixed, tight at the corners, never reaching the muscles around her eyes. It was a performance she had refined over years. Yet here, it felt brittle. She felt the heat of the lights pressing against her skin, intensifying the sensation of being under a microscope. She checked the left side of the row, then the right, but the crowd surged forward, eager for another angle. She held the smile, locked it into place, and braced herself for the next question. The exit remained out of reach, buried behind the relentless battery of the press, leaving her trapped in the center of the glare. The rhythm of the shutter clicks sounded like rapid gunfire, a constant, abrasive assault that swallowed any attempt at casual conversation. Jenna kept her gaze fixed forward, projecting the image of a woman entirely at ease, but her fingers twitched once against her side. She needed to know the scale of the digital reaction. She took a half-step closer to her publicist, who stood just behind the line of sight of the primary camera bank. The crowd surged, voices overlapping into a singular, incoherent roar. Jenna tilted her head, shielding her mouth with her shoulder to create a private space in the middle of the chaos. She leaned in, her breath shallow. "Check the feed," she whispered. The words were barely audible, lost to anyone more than a few inches away. Her publicist stopped typing, eyes widening for a fraction of a second before nodding once. The instruction was delivered. The request for information hung in the air, a pivot point between her professional facade and the reality of the storm currently unfolding on every screen in the vicinity. She straightened back up, pulling her shoulders into a rigid line, and waited for the confirmation of the damage. The publicist angled the smartphone screen toward Jenna, shielding it from the stray beams of the camera flashes. The display was a blur of rapid-fire notifications. Thousands of comments cascaded down the feed in a relentless, vertical tide. Every refresh added dozens more. Jenna tracked the movement of the text, her eyes widening as the sheer volume of speculation registered. The words came too fast to read individually, but the patterns were clear. Accusations, side-by-side photo comparisons, and aggressive theories about her recent life choices. She felt the weight of the device in her peripheral vision, a concentrated window into a global conversation that had turned malicious in minutes. The air around her suddenly felt thin, the noise of the crowd blending with the rapid, rhythmic tapping of the publicist's thumbs as they attempted to mitigate the fallout. She tried to pull her focus back to the photographers, but the image of that scrolling feed burned behind her eyelids. It was not just news. It was a digital blockade closing in from every side. She realized then that the cameras were no longer the primary threat. The real pressure was coming from the millions of unseen eyes watching the screen, dissecting her existence in real time. She locked her jaw, bracing against the rising tide of digital vitriol. The digital storm remained locked in her mind, but she could not let it show. A photographer pushed through the front line, his heavy lens swinging toward her face like a weapon. Jenna did not blink. She shifted her weight, locking her core to keep from trembling. The camera clicked, a sharp, metallic bite of sound that demanded a response. She felt the muscles in her cheeks tighten, pulling her mouth into a practiced, upward curve that did not reach her eyes. She focused her gaze on the glass of the lens, seeing only her own distorted reflection staring back. Every instinct screamed at her to turn away, to hide, to move, but she forced herself to remain perfectly still. She smoothed the tension from her forehead, turning her face into a static image of indifference. The world was tearing her apart in the comments, but in the physical space of the carpet, she became a statue. She held the pose, breath held in her chest, waiting for the shutter to fire again. She was no longer a person to them. She was an object, and she would play that part until the last light faded. Her jaw remained set, her breathing rhythmically controlled. A fortress of silence built behind a calculated, empty smile. The next interviewer stepped forward, microphone extended, oblivious to the digital collapse happening behind the screen. He asked a standard question about her upcoming project, his voice cutting through the ambient roar of the crowd. Jenna turned her head, the movement slow and deliberate. She locked eyes with him, forced a nod, and began a rehearsed answer about her character's motivations. Her voice remained steady, a flat, professional monotone that gave nothing away. As she spoke, she could hear the intermittent pings from her assistant's device nearby, a constant reminder of the internet's relentless churn. The interviewer leaned in, his eyebrows raised in a gesture of feigned curiosity, clearly waiting for a slip. Jenna did not give him one. She kept her hands clasped at her waist, fingers pressing into her palms to ground herself against the urge to walk away. Every word she uttered felt like a transaction, a trade of information for the right to exit the carpet. She saw the interviewer glance down at his own phone, then back at her, his expression shifting from professional to predatory. The gap between the scripted dialogue she provided and the chaotic reality of the public debate widened with every passing second. She finished her sentence, offered a brief, empty nod, and prepared to move to the next station in the gauntlet. Jenna offered a light, melodic laugh to satisfy a photographer's request, but the sound triggered a fresh wave of digital carnage. Across the line, her assistant caught the tablet as it nearly slipped from sweat-slicked fingers, the device vibrating with such intensity it seemed to pulse. Each time Jenna tilted her head to laugh, the internet responded with a new, more aggressive theory. The comments section moved so quickly that the text blurred into a single, rolling stream of speculation. She could see the reflection of the screen in the assistant's eyes, a rapid-fire sequence of accusations and forensic dissections of her bone structure. Jenna pushed past the next group of microphones, her pace quickening. She did not stop to verify the latest claims. She simply kept moving, her feet finding a rhythm on the red fabric. The air around her felt heavy with the collective gaze of thousands of unseen observers. She forced another laugh, a sharp, hollow sound, and immediately watched the assistant's phone screen light up with a fresh surge of notifications. Every movement she made was being fed into the machine, transformed into data, and spat back out as a global controversy. She reached the end of the press line, her resolve hardening with every step she took away from the flashbulbs. The final interviewer stood directly in her path, blocking the exit. He held a microphone inches from her face, his eyes darting toward the digital devices held by the press corps. He asked about the themes of her upcoming project, but the cadence of his voice betrayed his true intent. He lingered on the word identity, letting the term hang in the air like an accusation. Jenna did not blink. She kept her posture rigid, her hands folded tightly behind her back to hide the tremor in her fingers. The surrounding photographers shifted, waiting for her to react to the unspoken question embedded in the interviewer's query. She gave a rehearsed response, detailing the technical aspects of her performance, but the words felt like static. She could hear the hum of the crowd, the low-frequency drone of 1,000 people whispering about her features. The interviewer leaned in, his smile thin and brittle, and asked if her recent choices in life had influenced the character's arc. It was a pointed strike, a clear attempt to force a confession about the changes everyone was debating. Jenna tightened her grip on her own wrists, forced a brief, unyielding smile, and pivoted toward the door. She did not provide the answer he wanted, choosing instead to step around him into the narrowing gap of the exit lane. The path forward seemed to stretch indefinitely, a narrow corridor of blinding light and aggressive questioning. Jenna kept her eyes fixed on the distant exit, her pace steady despite the leaden weight in her legs. Every step felt like wading through deep water. Voices blurred into a singular, discordant roar of speculation, each syllable a fresh jab at her composure. A flash exploded directly in her line of sight, turning the world into a jagged smear of white. She blinked rapidly, her vision swimming, and her heel caught the edge of the carpet. She stumbled, her weight shifting forward, but she caught herself against a metal stanchion before she could fall. The momentary lapse in her posture triggered a fresh outburst from the crowd. A collective intake of breath followed by a surge of rapid shutter clicks. She did not look back. She gripped the cold metal until her knuckles turned white, then forced herself to release it and continue walking. The air was thick with heat and the sharp, ozone scent of electronic equipment. Her assistant moved in her peripheral vision, phone held high like a shield, screen still scrolling with relentless commentary. Jenna ignored it all, focusing only on the rhythmic sound of her own breathing and the growing distance between her and the center of the storm. She arrived at the final mark, a spot of tape hidden beneath the velvet runner. This was the end of the line. Jenna stopped, felt the solid floor beneath her, and squared her shoulders. Instantly, the environment shifted. The sporadic clicks of the photographers coalesced into a rhythmic, deafening barrage. Light exploded in front of her, white-hot and relentless, washing out the shadows and the faces of the crowd. She felt the warmth of the bulbs on her skin, a tangible pressure that pushed against her. She locked her muscles, holding her position with absolute stillness. Her eyes remained fixed on a single point in the distance, ignoring the hands-waving cameras and the shouting voices that had become nothing more than background static. The world consisted only of the next flash, then the next, an infinite series of microseconds captured in high definition. She turned her head slightly to the left, then the right, her movements precise and mechanical. Every muscle in her body burned from the effort of maintaining the facade, but she did not break. She was a statue caught in a storm of electricity, providing the public with the image they demanded while her mind retreated to the silence waiting just beyond the threshold of the carpet. The final shutter snapped, and Jenna did not wait for the echo to fade. She pivoted on her heel, the sudden movement drawing a chorus of shouted questions that clawed at the air. She walked fast, head down, eyes scanning the pavement for the path ahead. A barrier of photographers surged forward, cutting off the clear line to the vehicle, their equipment forming a wall of glass and steel. Jenna did not stop. She lowered her shoulder, found a narrow gap between two reporters, and pushed through with a sharp, decisive motion. A microphone grazed her arm, but she did not flinch. She reached the curb where the car sat idling, its door already held open by her assistant. She lunged forward, feet leaving the asphalt, and ducked into the interior. The heavy door swung shut behind her with a dull, muffled thud. The transition was instantaneous. One moment, the world was a riot of sound and strobe lights. The next, the interior was tomb quiet. The roar of the crowd diminished to a distant hum, then vanished entirely as the lock clicked into place. She sat in the darkness, the sudden lack of pressure leaving her momentarily breathless as the vehicle began to roll away from the curb. The vehicle pulled into the flow of traffic, the streetlights outside casting rhythmic pulses of amber and gray across the cabin. Inside, the silence was thick, heavy enough to feel. Jenna remained upright for a moment, her hands resting on her knees, fingers locked together. She kept her jaw tight, maintaining the same precise line she had held for the last hour. She inhaled deeply, trying to steady the rhythm of her lungs, but the air felt thin. Her eyes flickered toward the window, watching the city blur into streaks of light. Slowly, the tension in her neck began to fray. She let her shoulders drop, the rigid posture finally giving way to the gravity of the seat. Her mouth, previously held in a controlled, practiced arc, went soft. The smile dissolved, replaced by a deep, hollow exhaustion that settled into the corners of her eyes. She leaned her head back against the cool leather of the headrest and closed her eyes, letting the mask of professional composure slide off entirely. In the dim light of the moving car, the muscles in her cheeks relaxed, leaving only the weight of the day behind. She did not open her eyes as the car turned a corner, her breathing slowing to match the steady hum of the engine. The assistant sat motionless in the front seat, aware of the need for distance. Jenna shifted, her movement small and deliberate within the confined space of the cabin. She reached into her purse, fingers brushing past keys and loose change until they found the cool, hard edge of a compact mirror. She pulled it out. The metal felt heavy in her palm. For a long second, she just held it, the lid closed, listening to the hum of the tires against the pavement. She clicked the latch open. Light from a passing street lamp caught the glass, illuminating her face in a brief, sharp flash. She stared into the reflection. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. She examined the lines around her eyes and the set of her mouth, searching for the person the world had spent the last hour debating. The gaze was steady, unblinking, and entirely her own. She did not look for flaws, she looked for reality. Satisfied, she snapped the mirror shut with a decisive, metallic click that echoed in the quiet car. She dropped the object back into her purse and stared out the window, her expression settled, no longer waiting for the world to define her. The engine surged as the driver pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights and the mounting pressure behind. Outside, the city began to transform into a series of long, golden streaks against the deep blue of the night. Jenna kept her gaze fixed on the glass, watching the architecture of the city slide past in an endless, rhythmic blur. In the seat beside her, the tablet screen glowed with a faint, pulsing light as notifications continued to stack up, but she did not reach for it. She did not lean toward the noise. The car picked up speed, the tires humming a low, steady vibration that resonated through the floorboards. Every intersection they passed deepened the distance between her and the crowd. She watched a traffic light shift from red to green, the color washing over the interior of the cabin before fading into the dark. The chaos of the last hour was a distant frequency now, losing its grip on the present moment. She rested her hand on the armrest, her fingers perfectly still. As the vehicle turned onto the main highway, the last traces of the event vanished into the rearview mirror. She looked ahead at the open road, the city lights ahead forming a path that led nowhere but away, and she did not look back once.